A Trip into the Darkness. Chapter 10. Troy was not surprised when he saw his pet throw the water bottle across the room after she opened it. She must have creditably concluded that it was the reason she was so groggy, as she made her way to the door from her bed. What he was astonished by was how quickly she started losing her composure. She went from a drug-induced haze to a seething mess in a matter of 42 hours. The following 19 hours, Mallory exceedingly got worse. Rewatching the footage on Fast Play, he witnessed her skin pale and dark circles appear below her eyes. When she appeared to be conversing with herself, he stopped the speed play on the footage so he could hear what she was saying. Listening, Troy discovered that she was indeed chanting some old poetry. He'd never been a fan of modern literature, but he had been well schooled, and when she started to recite Spirits of the Dead, he realized she was quoting Edgar Allan Poe. Thy soul shall find itself alone mid dark thoughts of grey tombstone, not one of the crowd to pry into thine hour of serenity. Be silent in thy solitude, which is not loneliness, for then the spirits of the dead who stand, and life before thee are again, and dead around thee, and their will shall overshadow thee. Be still. The night, though clear, shall frown, and the stars shall not look down from their high thrones in the heaven, with light like hope to mortals given, but their red orbs without beam to thy weariness shall be seen, as a burning and a fever which would cling to thee forever. Now our thoughts thou shalt not banish, now our visions nearer to vanish. From thy spirit shall they pass no more like deep dewdrops from the grass. The breeze, the breath of God, is still, and the mist upon the hill, shadowy, shadowy, yet unbroken, is a symbol and a token. How it hangs upon the trees, a mystery of mysteries. Troy felt slightly flabbergasted that she had memorized so much of his work, whilst her reciting went on for hours. Whenever food was delivered, she went feral, trying to reach the opening. He decided then that it was imperative that he keep her sedated with opioids to ensure she remained calm. She had only been locked in the safe room alone for a little over 4 days, and virtually the entirety of the first day she had spent sleeping. After she had woken up that first time, she had not bothered trying to sleep again. She would surely drive herself psychotic without rest. Pausing the footage, Troy leaned back in his office chair and rubbed his temples. He was excited to see her, but slightly worried at the same time. He knew that was nonsense because, from all the research he had done, it was stated that it took anywhere from 2 weeks to a couple of months for a changeling to lose their sanity and turn rabid. Still, he knew he was going to have to change his methods with her. With that, Troy stood up and began making his way towards the basement and his prize, which was sealed within. Tilda. Mallory was certain by this point she should have made an indentation in the floor due to the amount of time she had already spent pacing the room. She had tried sitting still, but whenever she stopped, it felt like her skin was crawling. Her mouth hurt, her throat burned, and her stomach felt hollow as if she hadn't had any food for over a week. A week was a long time, and she didn't think she had been locked in this room that long, yet. She was ravenous, except for the morsels of inedible nonsense that they kept trying to feed her. She had not slept since she had sobered up, but she didn't feel fatigued. Even if she had been tired, she doubted she would be able to make her body and mind slow down enough to fall asleep or even lay still. Was this her reality now? To constantly feel wired and on edge? Dying painfully from starvation and thirst? She hoped not, but her optimism at this moment was not very high. The prospect of the door opening again had her glancing that way every so often. It had been a long time since any food or water had arrived for the cubby. She wanted to be ready if it opened again. The feeling of her hair rubbing against the side of her face had her pushing it back while clawing at the unruly locks. It felt thicker and wilder than she remembered it being. She wished she had a hair tie so she could tie it back. She needed her locks to stop harassing her. It was one of the many things that she wished she had right now. Wasn't her hair tied in a braid when she got here? Where the hell did the rubber band go? She should have found it by now, considering she'd been all over this room, but alas, it was gone. The click of the lock on the door made Mallory freeze mid-stride. As it swung open, she prepared herself to pounce and swung her body towards the door until she saw him walk in. Fear, hunger, and longing struck her body, and the air seemed to be knocked out of her as his energy rushed towards her. Taking a deep breath, she smelled his husky scent, and it made her want to go to him. Instead, she forced herself to take a step back, even though her body was screaming at her to attack. The door quickly shut behind him. Troy was wearing a black tight-fitting t-shirt with dark gray dress pants. Glancing at his feet, she saw shiny black shoes. His hair was perfectly groomed, exactly like the last few times she remembered seeing him. The power rolling off his body was overwhelming, even with him being on the other side of the room. She took another step away from him. "What do you want?" she asked, while glancing away to stare at the gray wall. Focusing on her breathing, she tried to calm her racing heart, which felt like it was trying to tear through her chest. Clearing his throat, Troy walked over to the chair and sat down before he answered. "I'm checking on you." He looked over at the discarded trays with food still on them, and then at the trays that had been smashed against the wall, along with their substance. "Seems you've been having a hard time adjusting," he said, as he went back to staring at her. Mallory's left leg started to bounce. She tried leaning her weight on it, but that only resulted in her body shaking. Her skin was crawling and her teeth were aching. In an effort to distill some of her agonizing anxiety, she started pacing the room again. "I don't know what you expect of me," she was able to force herself to say. His energy was calming, but the smell of his blood created a bloodlust that made it hard for her to see straight. A red haze filled her vision, and she felt tormented. Being forced to listen to his strong heartbeat was maddening. It was a steady rhythm, as if he did not have a care in the world. So different from her heart, which was beating so fast that she felt lightheaded and short of breath. A wave of anger blossomed within her with the thought that he was able to maintain such a calm demeanor, whereas she was on the verge of freaking out. Mallory started grinding her teeth, enjoying the distraction that it provided. "For starters, I expect you eat the food that I have delivered for you, along with drinking your water," Troy informed her. Mallory shook her head violently and replied, "You expect me to eat and drink your drugs so I can sleep the entire time you keep me alive in this godforsaken box?" "You have gone through a change, and keeping opioids in your system will help keep your body and mind calm." "Opioids? That's what you've drugged me with?" she asked as she risked a glance in his direction. She regretted it the moment they made eye contact. A growl escaped her lips. Lust and hunger mixed, successfully fogging her chaotic mind. "You feel like a savage, do you not? Having an impossible time focusing or holding still? Your body is nothing more than an aching bundle of nerves, and you can think about nothing else besides blood and carnage." His response was so certain, and he was exactly right. "You've gone through this before?" Mallory asked. "Not exactly, but I know what I have done to you. Your body is trying to accept this change, and you need medications to take off the edge so you can relax and sleep." "Not sleeping enough is enough to drive any creature to insanity," Troy told her as he shifted in his seat. She could feel the sexual arousal emitting from his body, and she wanted to storm him so badly and take not only his blood but everything else he had to offer. "I did not want this change," she screamed at him as she paused in her pacing. "I had a life and a future. I had dreams, and I was so fucking close to achieving before your selfish, entitled self came along and took it all away from me. You're a scum, and I will not let you drug me into oblivion, just so I can be your sick plaything whenever you decide you want me." Mallory had moved closer to him during her wrenching lecture. Standing within a couple of feet of where Troy was seated on his chair, she felt her sanity and composure slipping. Licking her dry lips, Mallory went to turn around. In that half second, she had her back turned. Troy was on her. An arm snaked around her chest and pinned her arms against her body, and his other arm shot up to her. She expected to feel his hand around her throat, but instead she felt a prick at the base of her shoulder. "No, motherfucker," Mallory yelled as she thrashed within his grasp. And the next instant, the hand that had stabbed her with a needle was at her throat, squeezing. "That is a very dirty mouth, Mallory. You will not speak to me in such a manner." He panted against her ear, rocking his hips against her ass. She felt his hard length rubbing against her and was immediately wet and needy. Mallory tried to struggle, but felt lightheaded because of his touch and the hand wrapped around her neck, cutting off the blood flow. "Do you understand me, little girl?" he whispered in her ear. She wanted to tell him she would never bend to his will, but her limbs were already feeling weak and not in her control. Her hands were clawing at his hand at her throat, and she felt like the world was starting to spin. The scent of his blood filled her nostrils, making her teeth ache. She felt the pressure ease off her windpipe enough to allow her to gasp for air. "Okay," Mallory said, needing him to help her in whatever way he would. Blood, sex, she did not care at that moment. As long as he gave her something to take that agonizing anguish away, she would willingly submit to his demands. "Good girl," Troy told her, kissing the side of her face before releasing her entirely to return to his seat. Panting, she felt the drugs hit her, and she stumbled over to the far wall, putting her back against it. She slid her body down to the floor. Her stomach was hollow as the room started to sway. "Why did you pick me to do this to?" Mallory mumbled as her body seemed to vibrate. "You are special, Mallory. Strong enough to take this change and live this life. You are also exceptionally lovely to add to the equation." Troy's response seemed like it came from a mile away. She felt like wave after slapping wave hit her body, shoving her around in an endless ocean water. "I don't want to be drugged," she replied as she tried to focus her vision on the man sitting in the chair across from her. Tilda. Troy wanted to tell her that no one wanted to be drugged, but he knew that would be a lie. Humans were fiends, constantly craving their next high. But she was no longer a human. No, she was something else entirely. Looking at her now, sunken on the floor with her eyes glassed over, she looked broken. It was unfortunate that he would have to keep her this way. He hoped that someday she wouldn't need this regimen. He remembered what she had looked like when he first came in. She had been unhinged and practically vibrating with energy. He was surprised when she hadn't ambushed him immediately. Her control was stronger than he had expected. "It's an unfortunate fact that not many people get what they want in life," Troy told her as he slid his phone out of his pocket to send a quick text to Ruby in the kitchen. Mallory had gone long enough without food and water. He desperately wanted to feed her from his neck, but she would have to wait for that. He would use his blood as a reward for her cooperation. After pressing send, he returned his phone to his pocket and went back to staring at his pet. Her room needed to be cleaned, but he would wait to have someone come in and do that after she passed out. "I'd be much more likely to get what I have wanted in life if you hadn't meddled," Mallory mumbled. "Perhaps, but what kind of unfair and miserable existence would that be?" Troy asked, instead of answering. She glared at him, turning her head, and looked away. "Tell me something about yourself, Mallory." "Like what?" she growled back, still not looking at him. Troy reached down and adjusted himself in his pants. "Well, I guess we could start by first stating what I already know about you, and then you, dear Mallory, can fill me in on anything I left out. Does that sound fair?" Troy asked her. He waited minutes for a response, but when none came and she continued to stare away from him, he decided he would go ahead and start. "Your name is Mallory Renee Vander, born September 12th, 1999, in Springfield, Missouri. Your mother was Catherine Jean Vander, who died a few years ago. You attended the University of Toledo, where you received your bachelor's in English. Currently, you are enrolled at Ohio University, working towards completing a master's in literature. Of course, this makes sense considering how much you enjoy reading. You are also what this generation would call a pack rat, only you collect odd things that others would never take the time to pick up. You are also scattered and completely unorganized, which isn't surprising, considering you have more than likely had to work a lot in your life to afford anything. You are drowning in debt, but you stay up to date on your bills, which means you are intelligent and don't want to risk the possibility of becoming homeless. And you are very athletic. I'd be willing to say you're a runner and avoid the gym, because you not have time for such a small luxury. You also never wear a bra, considering I didn't find a single one anywhere in your disaster of an apartment. Troy stopped reciting information to wait and see if Mallory would have anything to say. She had become rather stiff, her breathing was shallow. He observed these changes in her demeanor while he told her the small number of tidbits he had learned while snooping around her apartment. There are other things he thought about adding to his speech, like the fact he had only found male scents in her apartment, which led him to believe that she didn't have any actual friends. The thought of mentioning another male made his blood boil, so he had left that out. It also didn't matter if she had any friends in the past. That life was over for her now, and she needed to know that she was not going back. "It's wrong that you searched my home," Mallory finally said. He was beginning to wonder if she would simply try to ignore him all night. "It's not wrong, Mallory. You are my possession now, and I have every right to learn about you." "You're a sick, twisted psychopath. Fucking sick," Mallory said as she shook her head like she couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that he would be interested in learning about her. It had been easy for Troy to find out all that information. She had all her important documents shoved in a cabinet in her kitchen. Social Security card, birth certificate, copy of her mother's death certificate, diplomas, credit score, and a ton of other things just waiting there in her kitchen for prying eyes. Most humans would try a little harder to hide important documents, but apparently Mallory wasn't worried about being robbed or anything of that nature. "Tell me, pet, do you know who your father is?" His only response from Mallory was the continual shaking of her head. "Any brothers or sisters? Family of any kind? Perhaps a boyfriend waiting on your return?" "Nope," she informed him angrily. "I have no one. Are you happy?" "I truly am giving you a better life," Troy thought, leaning back in his chair. Both of his parents were dead, and any family he had would be somewhere in Germany, but at least he had money and power, unlike this poor creature, who he had saved from that damned life she was living. It tasted like acid when he mentioned her having a male companion, but he had to know. He hadn't found anything that would suggest that another person regularly visited her apartment. When he went through her phone, he saw that she had made a call to someone named Lancy Blancy right before he took her. He assumed that was a friend, but there were no messages between the two to suggest they were close. In fact, she had very few messages with anyone on her phone. The opening of the small food door alerted Trey to the fact that her dinner was ready. He watched as the tray slid into the room and waited for the door to close before he stood up to retrieve her tray.